Hi friends, this episode wraps up this first 6-session mini-series that I was calling The Way Beneath the Work. I'm super pumped because I'm definitely continuing the Out of Step podcast at this point. It feels so good. I felt really called to release these first 6 sessions with the focus on the real and honest journey of what it takes to really discover this path that we're on, to find this niche, this place that we really belong within this ecosystem of supporting other humans. And it can be a really long and challenging path, which you have definitely seen if you've been following along for the past 5 episodes. And there isn't really a finish line to this whole journey that we're on. I want to take some time today to do some reflection, because one of the great things about getting to connect with Ari and Sagewolf and Kathleen and Sarai is by me doing this podcast, I got to take a lot away. So I want to talk a bit about what has been nourishing for me personally and how that's playing into my current stage within my own life. And I also want to announce that the next cohort of the Wayfaring Method is just now opening. This is my 8-month coach certification that doesn't feel anything like a stuffy coach certification. Like this podcast, this is for those of you that like to play more on the edges of things. This isn't going to feel like a traditional coach training at all. We do blend some fairly traditional coaching models, but definitely with touches of esoteric, the somatic, even an introduction on how to bring parts work into that coaching framework. And the most important thing here isn't just that you're going to learn how to do this for others, but how do we do the work for ourselves so that we can show up in the way to support other humans? One of the most important things we have to recognize is that we are co-regulating with the person that we're working across from. So if I am unstable within myself, that's going to be felt, and that's not going to create a secure place for the other person to do the work that they need to do. So our own inner work is just as essential as learning how to do that work with other people. And that's going to be a huge part of this process. So if you're curious, you can head to outofstep.life/Wayfaring Method. And of course, I'll put the link into the show notes as well. And there will be a button at the bottom of the webpage. If you read through the website, you're still unsure, you still have questions, there's a button there for you to set up some time to chat with me. And I'd love to chat. As I look back on these past 5 episodes, one of the most potent and truly consistent concepts that have run through every single session is there is no easy shortcut. And we live in a world of the 5 easy steps, which is a great marketing tactic. But in my own experience and listening to Ari and Sagewolf and Sarai and Kathleen, this isn't the reality for most people, to find 5 easy steps to this deeper inner knowing. And so what I really want to focus on today with you is these little takeaways, at least on my path, that have been super nourishing. With my first guest, Ari, my soul sister, I was really deeply reminded of the need for spiritual guidance. And I understand that this can be somewhat sensitive territory because a lot of people have scar tissue with family and relationships with religion or spirituality. And so a lot of those people have abandoned this spiritual aspect of life because of that scar tissue. I know a lot of humans who have really never had that sense of a spiritual experience or some type of connection to what we might refer to as the soul. And for me personally, this has been a really long and winding journey because early on in life, we lived in the realm of what we refer to as creasters. You just go to church on Christmas and Easter, and it's really more of a social gathering type of a thing. It's not necessarily real spirituality. But through an experience in high school where a few of my friends were in a terrible car accident, I started to really look at spirituality in a different way and really question everything I thought I knew. And it wasn't until I really started to find this more eclectic path, which I know a lot of people might fault me for it because I'm not dedicated to one single religion or spirituality. But this eclectic path was me exploring so many different traditions and finding resonance in different ways with so many different traditions. And then especially as I talked about with Ari, this new connection with Celtic history and mythology, paganism has been a huge missing piece for me that allows me to connect to something that's always been important, which is that very earth-based type of spirituality, but now getting to do it through something that's through my own ancestry. And another really important piece to this eclectic path that I've taken as someone who supports other humans, I feel like I can sit with anyone and be present to what they are believing and experiencing without any need for me to judge it as right, wrong, good, or bad. Because I can see so much within any spiritual belief system that when they're talking about God, or they're talking about goddess, or they're talking about source or Mother Earth, there's something in there that I can see has power and potency to it. And so my own personal belief systems don't really have to come into the picture because I can appreciate what's happening for them. And I do think as coaches, guides, mentors, healers, whatever we call ourselves, this ability to sit and be present with others without our own dogma, coloring and shaping how we're perceiving them, I feel it's really essential. I feel like it's a really important part of what we do. And part of the way that I do that is because I've had this a very eclectic path with my spirituality. And I feel so tuned into it at this point from within my own perceptions, within my own belief systems, instead of what I was trying to do in the past, which is find the answer, the one big answer existing already somewhere else in the world. And let me be crystal clear. I'm not saying that that is the right path, the wrong path, good path, bad path. It's just the path that has worked for me and what it has done for me. So in this conversation that I had with Ari, I felt just such a deep sense of appreciation for her because she was able to truly bring in that aspect of ancestry, source, and spirit, and how incredibly valuable it can be to our discovery of ourselves and our truth. And then we got the drop in with my brother, Sagewolf, who has been a huge inspiration to me on the level of community. And I love where our conversation went because we talked a lot about the different kind of levels of community. And I'll be the first to admit that there are definitely places that I call, quote, community in my life that live a bit more on the surface level. And I'm not even saying that in a bad way, no judgment to that, but it's a little bit more like, how's the weather? How you doing? And there's not really much of a sense of accountability or expectation there. And there is definitely place for that within my life and within my whole kind of perspective. What I'm feeling really called to lately is what Sagewolf was talking about, especially towards the end of our episode, which is community that has a certain level of depth and accountability to it. It's a place that we have built the trust, we have built the relationship that we can be challenged, we can be pushed, we can be charged, we can be shaped within those fires. And again, that's something that requires effort, because we have to build that level of trust. We have to really step in. And for me, there has been some challenge in finding this level of community for a couple reasons. Number one, of course, there's the vulnerability aspect of, if I'm going to try to have that level of relationship and community, I'm going to have to show up fully. And that's not comfortable, especially because I have had some experiences in the past where I did open those sides of me, and unfortunately they were, I don't want to say taken advantage of, but manipulated or used in a way to get something from me. So there is definitely a little bit of scar tissue there that I've been having to work through to reopen. And those edges that I'm bumping into, it's actually part of the medicine, because it asks me to step in and do some of the work for myself to heal some of that scar tissue and to find my ability once again to open up vulnerably and to allow myself to be seen in a way that isn't always safe. But as I said, I really want this type of connection in my life, and especially at this point in my journey, I think it's absolutely necessary for me to continue on my path. I don't know that I could do this without community. I don't know that I could do this without support, and that was a big part of what Sagewolf was able to share with us too. And then y'all got to meet my homie Sarai, who loves to drop the F-bomb a ton. And I love it too. I think my biggest takeaway with Sarai is also potentially the most obvious, which is the hard shit is non-negotiable if we want to have a deep relationship within ourselves. There's definitely a little piece of me that keeps hoping that I'll find the magic formula so that I can just stay in high vibes all the time. Because, yeah, that other stuff can be really uncomfortable. But if I'm being honest, I don't really think there is that life hack to just stay in that state all the time. And to be honest, I don't know that any of us would actually be happy just being there 24/7. I look back at all of my brutally hard experiences in life and how they have shaped the man who is standing here in this moment. And I like this dude. I think he's pretty awesome. And so as much as I look back and I know some of those things, some of the darkest times of my life, I'm also really grateful for them because, like I said, I don't know that I would be the person that I currently am today. And this has really been the point of the entire series, right? There are no shortcuts to making a real connection and finding real soul purpose. And there is the ability for us to bliss out and bypass these things. But I've tried that. I don't know if you have as well. And I don't know if you have found what I found. But when I was in those states and just trying to block out anything that was hard or, quote, dark, it felt pretty empty, and that bliss state felt really fragile. Like it was something that if I stumbled, it would fall and it would just shatter on the floor. And so I felt like I had to protect it with this like 6-foot bubble to just keep it from shattering. So it was never very comfortable either. I never really felt settled within that space. It makes me think of going to like a resort town. It's really fun. You show up, it's pretty, it's beautiful, it's clean, it's relatively safe. And for the first couple of days, you're like, this is awesome. The food's great, the air is beautiful. And then after a couple of days, you start to notice that, I'm starting to see that maybe there's a little bit of Disneyland here where it's all just a facade. It's just a really well painted facade. And those places can start to feel a bit empty. Have you experienced that? I know I have. And then I think of a place like Olympia, Washington, where I currently live. And don't get me wrong, this place is fucking gorgeous. Like, this is one of the prettiest places I've ever been. But this place also has an edge. It definitely has the grit. And that grit only comes from facing challenges for years and years and years and years. And I also experience that as depth. The people I meet here, to me, have real depth to them. And I think it's because of that grit. It's because of those experiences. If any of you are familiar with Bill Plotkin, and I've talked about him a few times within the podcast because he's just absolutely one of my favorites. He has a model called the 4 facets of the self, and it's the east, west, north, and south, and the different facets of the self that live within those different directions. In the west facet of self, there's a thing that he refers to as the dark muse. And the dark muse is actually that part of us that thrives in the, quote, dark areas of life, that thrives on these aspects of ourself that have risen through the fire. And I think this is one of the things that I really saw in Sarai as we went through the episode, is she carries both really beautifully. Because she's very joyful. She's such this bright spirit. And that aspect of her is maybe more akin to the East facet that Bill Plotkin talks about, where it has that aspect of, youthful innocence. He sometimes calls it the sacred fool, which is a very beautiful version of like, yeah, let's keep things light and easy. But if we focus too much on one facet, we start to become out of alignment and something starts to be missing. And that's something that I really see in Sarai, is that she can carry both. She can carry the west facet, that dark muse that really learned life through the fires. But she can also carry that very joyful, childlike spirit and hold them equally. And that's something that I really aspire to. And I think, again, thinking about my role as a wayfaring guide for other humans, my ability to cultivate all of those different facets allows me to be present for whatever shows up in the session, because I don't have any fear of it. I have a relationship with all of those facets, and I can stay present. I can stay grounded, regardless of what facet is showing up for my client in that moment. So I do think that, I feel inspired by Sarai, and seeing how she has the ability to develop those multiple facets of life and also live in them fairly simultaneously, which I think is brilliant. And then my fourth guest on this mini-series of The Way Beneath the Work was Dr. Kathleen Funk, who also loves the F-bomb, which was awesome. I was super pumped for this because of some selfish reasons, actually. I had developed a social media friendship with Kathleen that I talked about a bit in the beginning of the episode. And I just really thought she was one of the coolest fucking people. So this was my chance to actually sit down and have a deeper conversation, build a deeper relationship with Kathleen. So yeah, there was a little bit of selfish motivation in there too. It wasn't just for you as the listener. And I think that's what I reflect back on, and what felt really nourishing to me in that episode was listening to Kathleen's willingness to step into the unknown, to allow all things to continually change and evolve, really just because she heard the inner calling and had the willingness to follow that inner calling. There was even a part that we were talking, and I love that she made the distinction that it wasn't actually courage. It was just this sense that, almost like a sense of not having a choice. It's just, that's what's going to happen, and being willing to flow with it. Because I think sometimes for me, I think of it as like, I have to have the courage, and that courage might not always show up. And so the willingness to just move might be what we need most. Listening to Kathleen's story about how she went from a really successful long-term functional medicine clinic to dropping everything and going on a sabbatical just to paint, and then allowing that to eventually evolve into what she's doing now, which is this incredible blending, kind of this alchemizing of everything from all of those experiences. It felt like, in some ways, it felt like permission for, again, the journey that I'm on currently in my life, which is definitely this transitionary threshold space. I do finally think I'm learning my lesson, because this has happened a lot over the past 25 years, and sometimes I've gone with the flow, but I've also felt the distinct pain of resisting it. I talked to you all about my voice issues that I've gone through, both in like the first episode, and then I also mentioned it with Kathleen. But that time period was definitely feeling the pain of resisting what was really being called for from my inner world, my inner knowing, my guides, whatever you want to call them. But I resisted that inner knowing, and I definitely experienced the pain of it. It's something I'm still working through at this point in my life. Recently, it hasn't felt like these changes are quite as dramatic as what I was being called to back then. And I wonder sometimes if it's because I'm more conscious of the more subtle shifts. So it doesn't have to be such huge shifts. Things are evolving a little bit more fluidly over time versus resist, and then have to have these huge shifts. Because now I feel like it's showing up almost every like 6 to 12 months where something is asking me to take and make a shift, especially within my working identity. What's very cool, though, is the more willing I am to follow kind of the model that Kathleen offered us, the more willing I am to evolve and shift and flow with this. With each shift, I feel even more intertwined with more of my true self, more of that sense of soul purpose, or eco-niche, as Bill Plotkin talks about it. And my own work just feels more authentic. It feels more honest. And again, like that word fluid just keeps coming up for me, because it feels less constricted, less turbulent, less blocked. And one more thing that came up specifically in Kathleen's episode, definitely came up specifically in Sagewolf's episode, but I think that within Ari and Sarai's, we might not have called it out as specifically, but it was definitely present, is this idea of exploring our edges. Because I will gladly admit that I do like comfort. A part of me, let me be clear, a part of me really likes comfort. So exploring these edges, pushing these edges, sometimes is not that part's favorite thing to do. But I do have to say, in this phase of my life, I've found myself not just kind of looking for these edges, but really feeling called to pursue them. Just last week, I did the level 1 workshop for the Pneuma Breathwork certification. And I specifically stepped into this training because I knew it was going to push some edges for me. And like I said, I find myself actually wanting to find these edges. One of the facilitators of the workshop, Deus Fortier, he shared something with us during the workshop that really spoke to this. I guess there has been studies or observations of children on playgrounds or in schoolyards, and children who were on playgrounds that had fences showed up very differently than children that they observed on schoolyards or playgrounds that had no fences. And some of you may have heard this before, and this might surprise a few of you. The children that were in the schoolyards with fences, they would explore the entire space. They would go right to the edges of the fence. They would play on the fences, in fact. The children that were on the playgrounds or schoolyards that did not have fences would tend to congregate more towards the center. And now that I say that, I'm guessing that some of you are like, well, that does actually make sense, because we explore more when we know where those edges live. That sense of safety is there. And I asked ChatGPT if this is actually a study, and it seems that it might not have been an official study, but yes, there has been, plenty of conversations around these observations. And look, even if it's just purely metaphor, let's be honest with each other, it's a metaphor that makes a lot of fucking sense, because I look at my own life and I can definitely see where I was afraid to step out of the center and find where those edges were, and so I stayed very safely in the center. But those times that I've been willing to go out and explore and touch those fences, as soon as I know where those fences are, I love to explore out at those edges. I'll climb up the fence. I'll hang my head over the side of the fence, because I know where the edge is now. It feels more safe to explore. I wanted to bring that forward because, again, this is part of the reason I'm doing this podcast, is to get us to explore those edges for ourselves. And I know that there has probably been a few things that I've said, maybe a few things that Ari said, a few things that Sagewolf said, some things that Sarai said, maybe Kathleen, that didn't fully resonate with every one of you. And that's how we explore those edges. We hear the voices of other people, we look through their lens, and we say, yeah, I like that, let me extend my fence out to that edge now. Or we go, no, I like where my fence sits on this topic, I'm going to keep it right there. But we can only find those edges if we're willing to explore. I don't know if you're going to agree with me on this or not, but these first 6 episodes of the Out of Step podcast have felt successful as hell. I have received a lot of really amazing feedback from so many of you, and I can't tell you how grateful I am for that feedback. It's good to hear that people are really enjoying what is happening. Here's the thing. More importantly than even the external feedback is what it has felt like inside, though, because this feels so aligned with whoever I am becoming, whatever is happening in this kind of threshold and transition space that I am in. This feels like it's such an important part of it. And I don't know why or how that works out, but I'm just trusting in my greater source that I just need to trust and go with the flow. That sounded so cliche and packaged. Oof. But it's the truth. Well, that brings us to the end of this little 6-episode mini-series called The Way Beneath the Work. So what's next for the Out of Step podcast? Pretty simple. Season 2 is already getting recorded, and the first episodes will be out very soon. And this is just going to be broadening the scope even more. We're not going to have such a targeted, focused topic. So I am inviting more coaches, educators, facilitators, healers, even therapists into the podcast. But again, the thing that they're going to have in common is they're not just following the mainstream ways of doing this type of work. They're pushing the edges. They're testing the boundaries. And so this will be your place to come to push your own edges, to test what you think is possible within this ecosystem of supporting other humans. So stay tuned. I'm incredibly grateful that you have been on the journey and this far with me so far. And I hope, again, that this continues to be nourishing for you. Take care.